Okay, let's begin. We have been learning for the last 5 weeks about meditation, specifically Jewish meditation. And we characterized meditation as the work that we do with our mind to develop a deeper awareness and more integrated spiritual consciousness. We talked about different ways that we can understand ourselves, understand the universe, and ways in which we can connect ourselves to a divine reality, understanding the universe and our experiences in it as expressions of the presence or of manifestations of God's will. And really the whole idea was to challenge the way we think. But there's another model of Jewish meditation that we only touched on briefly in the beginning, and that is kavana. So we talked about hisbonenus, hisbodedus, which is seclusion and meditation. Kavana is translated as intent. So this is a little different than cognitive meditation. And in a sense, this is really a whole different kind of meditation. So this is let's put it this way. I'll ask the question. If you would put on a scale of 1 to 5, I think your book has this question on page 182. On a scale of 1 to 5, how central are each of the following to Judaism? Okay. Action, 1 to 5. 1 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. What would you say? Action, 1 to 5. You have 5. Yeah. Values, 5. Faith.
10.
Okay, we have 4 of them here. Let's rank them. Okay. Action, values, faith, and mindfulness. Let's rank them. So for you, faith is number 5. Yeah. Bracha, would you agree that faith is number 5, or would you say it goes somewhere else? Or which one would you put it?
I think faith.
You say faith is the highest.
Faith is faith.
Okay. No?
I've often thought of values.
Values.
Maybe close tie.
Okay.
Explain values. It's a very ambiguous word.
It is an ambiguous word. Without getting too technical about it, just whatever it means to you. Cindy, what do you say?
Indubitably faith, but it could also be very closely related to values.
Okay.
They are akin somewhat.
Christian, where are you on this?
I would say faith. I'll go with 5.
You would, yeah. How about our online people? Anyone want to jump in here with some thoughts about action, values, faith, or mindfulness? Which one goes up number 1?
I think it's actions.
Actions are for you the number 5 or the highest. Okay. Let's go to text. Yeah.
Isn't it faith? Action and value are within faith.
Oh,
Exactly.
okay. Very
All
good.
Very interrelated.
Very good. Action and values are within faith. The question is, which one is the goal? So there's a debate in the Talmud about what is greater, study or action.
Action.
So actually the Talmud says study is greater because it leads to action. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's expressed more succinctly in text 1 on page 183, Lo ha-midrash ikar el ha-masa, the essential thing is not study, but action. Or a modern day Jewish thinker said, Judaism is a religion of deed, not creed. Okay, so it isn't so much what you believe in, it's what you do in Jewish teaching. And our faith, so we've spent so much time talking about our faith orientation in this course. And what I want to turn our attention to today is that actually in Jewish teaching, our actions are held up as the highest, most important thing. And when we talk about that goes to your question, Robin, about values. What are values? So Jewish values are action oriented, right? And when we think about Jewish teaching, again, when we look at kind of traditional Jewish texts, the overwhelming nature of those texts is that they're action oriented. You have to dig deeper to find the meditative texts. But in our context, where we're talking about meditation, what I'd like to hopefully, with Hashem's help, present tonight is that action is actually a meditation.
Let me stop for 1 second so I can just tell you what my problem is with what you're saying.
Robin has a problem. Go ahead.
There's a man who grew up in a marketable town. Okay? And he goes through the motions without the emotion because it's what's always been done. So he goes to Shul on the Chagim or Yom Kippur. Why do you go to Shul? Because my parents went and I'm used to going. That's it. Okay? Do you have any deep-rooted love or faith? No, but that's what always was done, so I'm used to doing it. And you have the other person who found God, okay, later on in his life. And he goes because he has this burning faith that he feels is the only way for him, okay? And that precludes his actually going.
Okay, so make sure I understand what you're saying. Some people, we know many of them, who are Jews of habit or Jews of tradition, who do it because that's the way it's always been done, or do it because that's the way they were raised.
You're afraid not to.
Maybe they're afraid not to do it also, okay? And then on the other hand, we have people who found God later in life and discovered it as mature individuals. And for them, this is a necessity. It's a spiritual endeavor. And it's something that fills them spiritually, right? And so can we equate the actions of these two individuals? That's exactly what we want to talk about tonight, okay? So on a certain level, it doesn't matter. You know, for example, if imagine somebody getting pulled over by a police officer, and the police officer says, you know, you're going 85 in a 40-mile-an-hour zone. How do you feel about what you were doing? Completely irrelevant, because the action is the action. At the same time, let's go to text number 2 on page 185, and we see that the mitzvahs, the commandments, let's say, Jewish practices, require our intent. To fulfill a mitzvah obligation, we must actively intend to observe the mitzvah. So therefore, if we observe the mitzvah unwittingly, or for a purpose other than to perform a mitzvah, we have not performed the mitzvah at all. Now, some Torah authorities disagree and opine that mitzvahs do not require intent and are fulfilled even when performed unwittingly. However, the final law sides with the former opinion. So practically speaking, if a person walks by the shul on Rosh Hashanah and they hear the sound of the shofar, they just happen to hear it, can we say that they have fulfilled the mitzvah of hearing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? They heard let's say they were standing outside smoking a cigarette and they heard the shofar, you know, they were there for long enough to hear the whole thing. right? So you would say absolutely not, right? So this text, right? Or if somebody falls into a pool of water, can we say that they went to the mikvah, right?
But then is the half there. You're giving two different. One is going in the water, it's like a mikveh. But one who hears the shofar and he stood out.
Oh, he just heard it. He just heard it.
So there is something that's, he has.
So this person had no intent to listen to it. His ears heard it. So that's what this text is dealing with. The idea that really, to be considered a mitzvah, fundamental to the action of the mitzvah is intent, conscious focus, the sense that what I'm doing is as a godly act. Yeah.
Now, since this is kind of the difference between hearing and listening,
Mm-hmm.
what if somebody is standing outside of the temple and they start to hear it, but in that moment they decide to turn and listen?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Wow.
So that's an excellent question. What if somebody's walking by the synagogue, they hear the shofar sound, they didn't intend to hear it, and then they realize what it is and turn their attention to it? So that's that. I want to hold that question, and hopefully, if I haven't addressed it explicitly, remind me, because that's one of the important possibilities that exist in this domain. Okay. Now, when we talk about a mitzvah, the word mitzvah is translated in Judaism. So we have to say, in the Bagel and Lox Judaism, people translate mitzvah as good deed.
It's not.
In Orthodox Judaism, people translate mitzvah as commandment, right? In spiritual Judaism, the word mitzvah is translated as connection. The word, and this is not just this is a translation actually. The word mitzvah, look in text 3. The word mitzvah means a connection, as in the Aramaic term tzavta, and we actually have that same root in Hebrew, where we say tzevet. Tzevet means a team, like we refer to it as staff, a work team, but it means a group, a gathering. I pointed out in the past that the English word to enjoin is a better translation, because to enjoin somebody to do something means to order them to do something, to ask them, to impress upon them the importance of doing it, but it also contains this double meaning of to join with. One who performs a mitzvah bonds, continuing the text, one who performs a mitzvah bonds with God's very self, for God is the issuer of that commandment. This is the significance of our sage's statement: the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. The benefit of having done the mitzvah is having been bonded with the infinite God who issued the commandment. That's and that is the reward of the mitzvah, being in coherence with the divine reality. So now we have another model for understanding the mitzvah as a connection, integrating ourselves with God. And in this model, the mitzvah is actually even more powerful. When we think about our ability to connect with God, to be as a finite being. So again, we're in this course, we've been struggling a little bit with the word God. It's a problematic word in my opinion. It carries so much baggage with it. And the primary problem with the word God is that it indicates some kind of entity that we're trying to connect with. And what we've talked about here is that there really is only one entity. Everything is an expression. The existence of anything is because it emerges within God. So it emerges from the essential reality into a, but the reality that emerges, the created being, let's call it, is a finite and mortal and limited being. And so by nature of the way we experience reality, it's really impossible for us to be willfully outside of our reality, right? We can't choose to see the world we can't choose to be in the world other than the way we are. So we are in the world as individuals, we are in the world as specific beings, mortals, and the divine reality that we're trying to align ourselves with is transcendent and eternal and infinite and all those things that we are not. And so the mitzvah then provides an opening on the terms of the infinite, on God's terms, so to speak, where it's like it's an opportunity that's coded into reality to say these are the ways in which you can be connected with the higher purpose of everything. And just to dwell for a moment on how that works in Kabbalistic teaching. We, as individuals, as mortals, experience the world as we do through ourselves, through the self. Right? That's our primary way of, that's the paradigm in which we work in the world. We start from the self. Anything that I'll do because I want to is ultimately a reflection of the self. No matter how important it is to me, it's only ever as important as I am. And I am not that important. I'm not infinite. I'm not transcendent. I'm not eternal. Meaning, as much as I am a creation of God, I am. But the self-consciousness with which I operate in order to decide to do the things that are important to me, that's the problem, right? That's the limited part, the self-consciousness, that's the limited part. So whenever I'm doing something because I want to, it's a reflection from, it emerges from the self. And therefore, it's fundamentally human, limited, mortal, and insignificant. When, however, there is something which I experience as coming from the truth of the universe, not important to me, but from the truth of the universe, then it reflects the eternity that's outside of me, the eternity that's of the everything, the transcendence of the totality of the universe. I'm not doing it because, and this is why the word commandment becomes so important, because it's commanded to me, it's given to me from the outside, not from my parents, not even from my traditions. It comes from the same source as the origins of the whole universe. These are truths that are as true as the essence of the universe itself, as the origins of the universe. they are as true as that which preceded the emergence of the universe. It's eternal. It's as eternal as existence itself, or even pre-existence, right? We meditated on that a couple weeks back, right? Before anything came, right? That eternal was, is, and always will be, right? So that's transcendence, right? So when the mitzvah comes as a commandment, but this provides a unique, special opportunity, which is only available to us because we didn't think of it, because we received it as a commandment. And this is what allows us to be aligned with, to be in coherence with the eternal truth of the universe. It avails us this opportunity, which we actually, there's no way that we could provide this opportunity to ourselves. So, now this being said, the act of the mitzvah, if we would say that this, describing the mitzvah as we did, that it is something emerging from the eternal truth that preceded the universe, or to use more traditional Jewish language, we would say it's an expression of God's will. That's the same thing, right? Something which emerges from the eternal truth that preceded the universe. You could say that it's God's will, right? So again, to translate it into more basic language, if God wants this thing to be done, then it doesn't matter what I think of it. It matters that it be done. Or to put it into the more abstract language that we've been using, if this is truth, if this act or this way of behaving is one that reflects the eternal truth that preceded the universe, then the act is that. Doesn't matter so much, doesn't matter at all whether I understand what I'm doing or not. However, when we talk about connection, there's another aspect, which is that if what God wills is that I be connected with him, if God, when we talk about the mitzvah as an abstract truth that needs to be performed, then that's one way of looking at the mitzvah. But if we look at the mitzvah as being an opportunity for connection between the individual, between the human being, between the mortal and the transcendent and all-encompassing truth of the universe, then that connection requires intention, right? So again, being in coherence is one thing. Being connected is another thing. And as such, we would say that the mitzvah requires intent. We could talk about the mitzvah, and Kabbalistic language does talk about this, that there is the body and the soul of the mitzvah. The body is the act, the soul is the intent. And just as an intention without action is lifeless, what's a soul without a body? Dead. What's a body without a soul? Also dead. So let's say, for example, so therefore, when we say mitzvahs require intent, we're saying that this mitzvah, the intent of the mitzvah, changes it from being simply an act that is important to being an act that makes me connected. And this is important because we could say for two reasons. One reason is because one of the things that God desires one of the things that God wants, so to speak, is that we be connected with him. Why did he give us self-consciousness? We talked about this also. Why did he give us self-consciousness? So that through our awareness, through our consciousness, we would choose, we would embrace the divine reality. If we act only on instinct, if we don't have self-awareness in the way animals do, I think, then, or as they're calling it now, non-human animals. You heard this term, non-human animals? It's the latest rage. Humans. There's human animals and there's non-human animals. This is the thing, right? But what appears to me as one of the important differences between human and non-human animals is that humans have the awareness of self, can conceptualize ourselves, and we don't just react instinctively. Right? So what is the meaningfulness? Why is it that humans have an experience of self, have self-consciousness? This gives us the opportunity, if we consider the universe an intentional thing, right? The intent behind this would be that we would have the opportunity to connect with consciously, that self-consciousness, to connect consciously with the divine reality. So therefore, it's important that we have the soul in the mitzvah. It's important that not just that we do it, but that we be intentional in doing so. Another way of saying this, or another, or different, I don't know if you could think about it as a totally different reason or just another way of saying the same thing, is that the desire of God is that all of universe should reflect the divine reality. And that includes our inner self, our consciousness, our awareness. And this requires then that we have the mitzvah intention along with the mitzvah action. Okay, so that's the abstract idea. I'll give you a practical example of this, is in a relationship between two people who care about each other, let's say a husband and wife. So in there are things that a husband does for his wife, such as buying flowers. What matters about that, the act of buying flowers, is that it was given with the intent to be connected, given with the intent to show value. Right? If a person, if somebody, forgot that he had flowers in the car, if he absent-mindedly picked up a flower and it got stuck in his shoe and it ends up in the house, he didn't bring his wife a flower, right? It's if he picked it, he brought it to her, that's a flower, right? The act is, in this model of the Kavana act, if the point is to make connection, then the intent not only is important, it's everything. So when we talk about mitzvahs, the intent is the same thing. It changes the act from being simply an act to being a divinely oriented act. Now, I would say there's an exception, right? When we think of mitzvahs in terms of good deeds, which of course, mitzvahs are also good deeds, depending on how I think that I said before in a kind of sarcastic way that the bagels and lock Jews call mitzvahs good deeds. I think the reason why more traditionally oriented Jews don't accept that is because they understand that in the Western concept, what mean good is more specific than we mean it in the spiritual sense. But if we would define good in the way it's meant in spiritual terms, then a mitzvah is absolutely a good deed. Because goodness means to be in coherence with the truth of the universe. And thus every mitzvah is obviously a good deed. So, but let's say mitzvahs that are specifically and obviously good, even in the Western sense, there the act is what matters, not the intent. fascinating teaching in the Talmud. If someone drops $1, he loses it, and a poor person finds it, we would say that person has fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah, the mitzvah of generosity, being of kindness, of giving to the poor, right? Because the fact of the matter is, the money ended up in the hands of someone who needed it. Doesn't matter your intent, right? So in that sense, the mitzvah matters even without the intent. But largely, more broadly, when we talk about the work of a person becoming integrated with God in a conscious way, intent is everything. This is one of the reasons that we have a blessing before doing a mitzvah. Why we say Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvasav v'tzivanu before doing a mitzvah, right? For example, we're familiar with washing our hands for the challah. Before washing our hands for the challah, we or in this case after, we say Asher Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, blessed are you, God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us regarding the washing of the hands. Before lighting the Chanukah menorah, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, right? We have the blessing. What's the reason for saying this blessing? Because it's a way of transforming the act from an incidental act to an intentional act. Right. So going back to the example of the person who heard the shofar incidentally, or the person who fell into the mikveh incidentally, saying the bracha before hearing the shofar says, I'm not doing this because I like the sound, I'm not doing this because I want to, I'm not doing this because it's meaningful to me. I'm doing this because it's an opportunity to connect with the divine reality. Right. It's a way of directing. The mitzvah invites the act to be a meditation. Yeah, the mitzvah invites us to use this act as a meditative process. And so that's what's indicated here in text 4. And this is actually using the example of the flowers is very connected with this, with the words that we say in the bracha before a mitzvah and the blessing before doing a mitzvah. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav. The word kiddushanu translated as sanctified, right? Blessed are you, God, who sanctified us with the mitzvahs. The Alter Rebbe points out, the Baal HaTanya points out that the word kiddushanu is the same term that we use in marriage. Kiddushin is the act of betrothal. When the groom puts the ring on his wife's finger, on his wife-to-be's finger, he says, Hareat mikudeshesli. Behold, you are betrothed to me, but there's the same word, kiddushanu. It's of the same root. Kadesh, mikudeshes, and kiddushanu has the same kuf daled shin root. And so thus he points out that through performing a mitzvah, we become bound to God like the man betrothing his wife for the sake of being intimately united with one another. As the Torah states regarding the bonding of the first human couple, he shall cleave to his wife and they shall become one flesh. When we study the Torah, perform a mitzvah, we achieve a similar, or maybe actually an infinitely deeper and truer unity between our soul, along with all of its elements, and God's absolute infinite light. What's the difference between a relationship between two people and a relationship between a person and God? Because the relationship between two people needs to be constant. Well, let's say this. Two people don't necessarily belong to each other. And what I mean by that is they belong together. They belong next to each other. But they don't necessarily, they are not one. In having children, oneness emerges because the child is the product of both. But ultimately, you have two separate individuals. Whereas with God, we are actually one with God. We are a product of God. And so all that we need to do is to turn our attention to that and to orient ourselves in that way, which, as we said before, is not something that we can choose to do, because it shouldn't emerge from the self. It should emerge from the realness of reality. It should emerge from the eternal truth of reality, which is that we are one with God at all times. But back to the basic text, when we understand the mitzvah in this way, the mitzvah is a meditative process in which the act is an opportunity to establish, experience a connection with the divine reality. The intention is what makes that act meaningful and what makes the relationship manifest. So when a person does a mitzvah with this meditation, with the awareness that the act is the act of kiddushin, it's the act of betrothing myself with God, of unifying myself with God. So that turns this from an ordinary act into a profoundly intimate moment of connection with the infinite transcendence of the divine. Okay, so what did we say so far? We are, as individuals, as human beings, mortal. We experience the world through ourself. The self is not truth. Therefore, it's impossible for us to have a relationship with truth by our own decision. It must come through the mitzvah. It should come as a commandment. It should come from the eternal truth, not from ourselves. And therefore, the mitzvah represents a tzavta, a connection, an opportunity for connection, and actually for the deepest connection, which is possible at all, which is the unity between the human being and God, or more broadly, which is reflecting the inner truth of what I am, which I'm not aware of naturally. And therefore, the intention of the mitzvah directs my actions to become a manifestation of that truth. Mitzvah is a connection. Comments, questions? Online people, where are we? Anyone have thoughts?
Yeah, when you perform mitzvah, you basically align yourself with God. So you get like a close, yeah, you're right. It's a connection with God because it's God's wisdom that you're fulfilling, basically. Or if you sin, it's a disconnection or break in that connection or whatever it is.
Right.
And when you do tshuva, you reconnect yourself.
Right.
So like it's a closer connection.
A sin is,
It's a disconnection, basically.
well, I would say a sin is a return to the selfishness of the self, which is turning away from the truth of the connection with God. So Irina, very well said. Thank you.
Sorry. And also they say, when obviously when you do mitzvah, there's a certain connection. Think of it as like a rope that's connected to God. So, when you do sin, you kind of make a break in that rope, and then you do tshuva, you reconnect. It's a stronger connection, but it's a shorter rope because you understand, because
when you tie the knot,
you get closer to God. You get closer to God, but it's like it's a shorter road. Right.
What did I want to tell you about meaningfulness? Oh, about meaningfulness. Eduardo is so curious about what goes on in the synagogue. And so he finds a Jewish friend and he says, I would love to know what you guys do in the synagogue. Would I be allowed as a Gentile, would I be allowed to attend Shabbat services? He says, absolutely. You wouldn't understand what's going on, but everyone's welcome in a shul. He says, would it be okay if I sat next to you? Explain me what's going on. Sure, no problem. So they sit next to each other, and all along Jeffrey is explaining to Eduardo all the things. He wants to know, why is the Torah in the ark? Why is there a curtain in front of it? Why are they saying this prayer? Why are they standing? Why are they sitting? And everything, Jeffrey has an explanation. Why do they raise the Torah? You know, Jeffrey explains everything. Then the rabbi gets up to a sermon, and the rabbi takes his watch out of his pocket and he puts it on the lectern. And Eduardo says, Jeffrey, what's the meaning of placing the watch on the lectern? Jeffrey says, that has absolutely no meaning at all. All right. Huh?
See how long you have.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean anything. He wants to see how long he's going to speak. Yeah, but it doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Okay. So far, we've established that mitzvahs are not just behaviors. They're meaningful behaviors when they're fueled by intention, by meditation. What we want to take this now a step further and say that more than just saying that mitzvahs require meditations to become meaningful, but the act of the mitzvah itself is a meditation. Meaning that the mitzvah has a way of pulling our mind toward the meditative consciousness. And this is part of what I was tabling for later with your question before. When a person hears the sound of the shofar, which is it's a passive, in that case, it's not the best example because it's a passive thing, but hearing the sound pulls my mind, it invites me to that consciousness. So we talked about before was doing an act and filling it with consciousness. Here we're saying, do an act and it will induce your consciousness. It'll bring your mind to where it needs to be. An example of this, or example of the way this is expressed in Ramban, Nachmanides, page 189, text 5. The mitzvos, the Midrash says, the mitzvot were given only to refine the person. That is, the purpose of the mitzvahs is not to benefit God, rather to benefit humankind, to keep them safe from harm, to shield them from negative beliefs, base character traits, to remind them of the miracles and wonders of the Creator, and to help them know God. The Midrash uses the term refine, tzaref, which is used generally in terms of refining like fine metals. How you take silver and smelt it so that you can take out the impurities in the silver. You can skim it off the top, right? So the mitzvahs, this is to indicate that the mitzvahs refine mortals in a similar way to similar to the way a silversmith refines silver. It's a purposeful task done for the sake of removing all impurities. Similarly, mitzvot are designed to remove every harmful belief from our hearts, to inform us of the truth, and to enable us to be constantly mindful of the truth. So here you see Ramban is not framing the mitzvahs as acts, as meaningful acts with which we should do with intent, but he's saying these acts will formulate the way you think. They will change the way you think. Rambam, Maimonides, says a similar thing in text 6. But I think Sefer HaChinuch says it in the most powerful way. And this is kind of also borne out in modern day psychology. Modern day psychology teaches that smiling makes you happy. If you frown for a minute, you will objectively feel more down. If you smile for a minute, you will objectively feel happier. you can Google after the class, you can Google Amy Cuddy, Cuddy. She gave a phenomenal TED talk on this topic, showing the research. Huh? Use more, it's harder to frown, yes. The body works harder to frown than to smile. That's also true. But this, her idea, her thesis is the idea of power posing. That by putting your body in a confident position, you actually cause yourself to feel more confident. By putting yourself in a happy pose, you'll feel more happy. So, but this idea was expressed by the Chinuch in his book, which speaks about the importance of the mitzvahs. This goes back to the 13th century. Okay, so it's a pretty old work. He says as follows: "And now, my child," text 7, page 191, "I will enlighten you to appreciate the Torah and its precepts. You are influenced by your behavior. Your feelings and thoughts consistently follow your actions, whether for the positive or the negative. Your actions have the power to overcome the negative inclination within you, since the attitudes of your heart are influenced by your behaviors. Acharei hapeulot nimshachim halevavot. The heart follows the action. So when you do something, you end up feeling, your feelings will follow." I had an interesting experience today. I don't know if I told you, I'm doing some chaplaincy work now at Creedmoor State Psychiatric Hospital. So it's a pretty hardcore place. So in order to be able to go in there and to see people, I had to be trained in defensive techniques, because people can get violent there sometimes. So I had to be trained in defensive techniques. And I'm sitting next to a nice Jewish boy in this class. And 3 days we're sitting next to each other. And nod, hello, good morning, good afternoon. And then came the last part of the class, which is where we do, the hands-on stuff. So we found ourselves in a lot of physical contact, this gentleman and I. And after that, we felt closer. We became more friendly to each other after having been in that degree of contact. So it was interesting for me to experience that acharei hapeulot nimshachim halavavot. Through being physically close, we became more close. The conversation flowed. The good morning was different. The good morning on day 1 was different than the good evening on day 3, right? And that wasn't the same for the other people in the class with whom I didn't grapple. So here we're really framing the mitzvah again to bring it home. What we're framing here is the mitzvah is an unconscious meditation. The mitzvah can be an unconscious meditation, which will ultimately filter into our consciousness. And certainly when we open ourselves up to that influence, when we allow ourselves to be aware of that influence, the effect is much more profound. So Robin, to your question in the beginning, the person who does mitzvahs because that's the way they were raised, or because that's the way it was always done, or out of respect for their parents, grandparents, that will invariably have an effect on the way they think. It will, a person who does mitzvahs for the sake of tradition is better off than a person who doesn't do mitzvahs, right? There is an effect. Of course, again, what we don't know about ourselves, when we're conscious of that, it enhances it, it develops it further, but nonetheless. And then to Nathan's point, a lifetime of mitzvahs, meaning a person can have done the act meaninglessly for many, many years, and then in one day can turn around and realize the meaning of that. And the impact of years and years of meaningless practice is now activated. You know, it's like, it's different. If somebody does it the first day with a whole meditation before it, you know, it's not the same as somebody who, we'll go into some of the practical mitzvahs later. If you've done it every day, the meditation will be transformative, hopefully, more than somebody who's going to go and do it now the first time, because it's in your kishkas. You know, this act is in you. So that awareness at any time could turn around. As a matter of fact, the Tanya says, the Tanya brings down from the Zohar. I think actually the text is here. No, it's not. I'm not sure. So if we come across it later, we come across it. Tanya says, brings down the Zohar, which says that mitzvahs without intent are like a body without a soul, or like a bird without wings. The Zohar says that there are two wings to every prayer. There is love and fear, or inspiration and respect. Those are two ways of talking about that same idea. Right? A mitzvah, a prayer or a mitzvah offered without that inspired intent is like a bird that can't fly. Then he says something fascinating. He says, the prayers of the whole week are somehow wingless. Wingless, they're without wings. On Shabbos, we have more time to pray. We have more, the prayers are deeper on Shabbos. And so there's more wings. And so he says the prayer of Shabbos gives wings to the prayers of the week and carries them up. Right? So that's, I think, a way of conceptualizing this idea that when you've done something meaninglessly for all those years, it may be like a body without a soul. But in the one time where you recognize what that is and what that was, all of a sudden, all of those acts now become activated and become meaningful. And the impact that your consciousness has on you is so much deeper because the act is ingrained in you and it's a habit and it's real for you in a way that it wouldn't be just in the abstract. Yeah.
Does it matter if you do an action because you want to connect to God or because you're afraid? If you don't do it, you're afraid of the negativity that happens.
Okay, so there's deeper and there's deeper. That's why I framed the question was, for those who are listening online, the question was again, if I do it because the first way is what? Because of my respect for God, or because I'm afraid of offending him? Because I want to be connected with God, or because I'm afraid to not do it. So there's we could two ways of saying this is, so that's why that's the love and the fear, right? That there are two wings, right? But again, we can talk about these terms as wanting to be connected or inspired, and not wanting to be disconnected, right? Which is respect, or not wanting to transgress. That's respect. So fear. So there's lower. The Kabbalah talks about the lower fear and the higher fear, the lower love and the higher love. Okay. We mature. Lower fear, the lowest fear. The low fear is the lowest.
But aren't you fearing from God?
Huh?
You have fear from God. If I do something bad, God can punish me. Isn't that?
That's the low fear. That's the low fear. If I do something wrong, God will punish me. That's the low fear.
Stern, if he believes in God, he said, I'm afraid not to.
Howard Stern said he's afraid not to believe in God. Okay. Okay. Maybe that's, well, I don't know. I think that's a little higher than what we're talking about. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, let's move on.
Okay.
Talking about someone, talking about not believing in God. Heard a story about a rabbi. Somebody told him, "I don't believe in God," and the rabbi said, "You don't believe in God because you don't practice. You don't practice the mitzvahs. If you would do it, you would believe it." Meaning, there's again, just to go back to the spiritual idea. Since our paradigm of awareness is the self, it follows that the self wouldn't be able to come to, or it's not intuitive for the self to come to an awareness of God. But when that self is drawn outside of itself, then it becomes more and more intuitive to become aware of the beyond. So the mitzvah has the ability to deepen our awareness and to bring us closer to the truth of the universe. Now, again, this isn't the sole purpose of mitzvahs. It also helps us to recognize that, rituals, forcing ourselves to do it. We shouldn't think of ourselves as forcing ourselves to do it. We should think of ourselves as inducing ourselves, helping ourselves come to a higher reality. Kind of like, that we see this also, you might not be hungry, but you take the first bite and all of a sudden you get into it. But again, this isn't the only purpose of the mitzvahs. We have to remember that that the practical performance of the mitzvahs, as we said in the first text, the practical performance of the mitzvahs is very important. Is maybe the most important. The meditative quality is a feature, is an aspect of it. But even without meditating on it, it has its impact.
It's easier to connect physical to physical than it is to connect physical to spiritual.
It's easier to connect physical to physical than it is to connect physical to the metaphysical or the spiritual. And that's why if the mitzvahs are intended to bring us close to God, that's why the mitzvahs will be physical acts. Right? That's, if we think of the mitzvahs as invitations for the human being to join with God, then mitzvahs, being physical acts, are invitations in human language. They're in the language that we understand. The main focus, the Rebbe says, the main focus within Judaism is action, text 8, which entails practically fulfilling the mitzvahs. The main focus within Judaism is action. This was the Rebbe's line, Hamaisahu ha'ikar. Action is the main thing. The main focus within Judaism is action, which entails practically fulfilling the mitzvahs. At the same time, each Torah-based action has an effect on the person's character. Learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs refine the mind and emotions, as repeatedly emphasized in the works of Rambam, Maimonides, who served as a guide for the perplexed for his generation and continues to serve as a guide for truth seekers in all subsequent eras. So, just as classic meditation models channeling ideas and emotions by focusing the mind in certain ways with mindfulness techniques, mitzvahs are acts that channel these ideas by focusing the body through specific behavioral techniques. Like the mind, physical action produces inner attitudes and stances. When we meditate on something, it influences the way we feel about things, and actions have the same effect. Oh, by the way, about the idea of actions having an effect. So Selma Epstein came to her rabbi complaining about her husband Morty's temper. My husband has a temper, it's out of control. I don't know what to do. I talked to him, And she starts to talk, and the rabbi listens patiently. And after a few minutes, the rabbi says, Selma, I have an idea for you. Next time you see that Morty is starting to lose his temper, take a glass of water, take a sip, and swish it around your mouth. And don't swallow the water until he walks out of the room, until he falls asleep. And you'll see he's not going to lose his temper. Sure enough, she does this a couple days. It works like a charm. She comes back to the rabbi and she says, where did you get this idea? Swish water and it takes away my husband's temper? He says, it wasn't the water. It was keeping your mouth shut.
So true. No, you should be insightful.
Maybe he should put the water.
What? You know what? I could tell you one thing. They were both happier a few weeks later. Maybe they have unresolved issues, but at least they're, they feel calmer in the house. Okay. All righty. Let's look at some specific mitzvahs and their meditative agenda. Okay. Who has questions online? What about our online participants? Anybody has comments or questions? It's crickets online, let me tell you.
How can I hear it again?
You want to hear something again, Yosef?
The whole thing.
You want to hear
Where
the
is
whole
it
thing?
recorded? I missed the half of the class. So.
Oh, you'll be on YouTube after.
And what name?
I'll text it to you, Bezrat. Send me a text message and I'll send you the
Okay.
the recording. Okay.
Okay.
Person who has no faith will not be motivated to do any action. Yeah. And a person who doesn't do the action would have less faith.
And he is not propelled to do the action because he doesn't believe.
And that brings us to text 10. Maybe this is one of the meanings of the mitzvah of honoring your parents. Honoring your parents seems to be a good deed, right? By the way, I want to point out, it doesn't say love your parents. It says honor them, yeah? The Sefer HaChinuch explains, the root of the commandment for an individual to honor their parents, their father and mother, is that it's fitting for a person to acknowledge and return kindness to those who provided goodness, to avoid becoming a selfish ingrate, an evil and repulsive attribute in the eyes of God and mortals alike. So the first value or attitude that showing honor to our parents inculcates in us is hakaras hatov, appreciation. Showing appreciation for someone who has done good with me. What have they done good with me? They have they fed me when I was a baby, and they allowed me to grow up. They took care of me when I was helpless. So that's the most basic, the easiest way to understand. There's another part of it, which is that they are the material source of my life, meaning I wouldn't be alive if not for them. So again, on the more basic level, in as much as I like being alive, I am grateful to my parents for providing me with life. But then there's a higher awareness, which is that being aware that I didn't give birth to myself is a very deep, right? Think about that for a moment. I didn't give birth to myself. That's the first door opening, entry point to become aware of the fact that I didn't create myself, that everything has a source. And therefore, that's a way for me to enter into the divine consciousness, that I am, that there is a source from which I emerged, and that source, the divine source with a capital S, is a divine source, the eternity that I emerged from. And so by giving honor and homage to my mortal source, it helps me to become more appreciative of the source in general. Right? So this mitzvah is designed to spur us to contemplate that our parents are the material cause of our existence in this world. And it's therefore truly fitting to honor them in every way and provide them with every benefit that's within our ability, for they brought us into the world and also toiled on our behalf in numerous ways when we were young. And Robin, to your point also, is that talking about faith. How do I know, in many cases, how do I know that I'm Jewish? It's from my parents. So the teaching of Torah is called Torah Simecha, Musar Avicha and Torah Simecha, the teaching of your father and the guidance of your father and the teaching of your mother is the Torah, right? And even for somebody who wasn't raised religious, or wasn't raised Jewishly by their parents, there is still so much in me which has opened me, to primed me to be able to learn what I've learned. I wouldn't be spiritually conscious in the way that I am if not for the way that my parents raised me. If you want to get even deeper, it wasn't always intentional on my parents' part. Based on some conversations I've had with some people, they have a lot of anger at their parents. But if we see life as a learning experience, that made me who I am. And as spiritually conscious as I am, that happens on the backdrop of what my parents did to me. And so I have to be grateful to that. I have to honor that. So honoring our parents, the acts of honoring our parents involve helping them. So the Talmud goes into details, helping them get dressed. My father-in-law would come home from work, and he'd sit down, and the kids would always untie his shoes for him. He would, huh? He's a young man at the time, but still is a young man. But that was a shtick that he had. But it's that's a way that he helped his children to ingrain in them, to instill in them the idea of honoring your parents. One isn't supposed to sit in the chair designated for their parent, to provide them food and drink, and not to contradict them, not even to agree with them. A person is not supposed to say to their parent, "I agree with you." Because if you could say, "I agree with you," it means I choose to agree with you, and I could also choose to disagree with you. There's no such thing as "I agree with you," just "Yes, sir." All right. So these are the behaviors that are meant to draw out in us these ideas of gratitude, appreciation, and of awareness of our source, and an appreciation for what we and kind of embracing what we are, what we've become. Let's go back to text 9. So that why did I say this again? Why I skipped to text 10? Because you asked about faith, and where is that? How does a person have faith if they don't do the actions, right? It's a kind of a vicious cycle or a self-affirming cycle. So who starts the cycle? Our parents. They start that cycle. They teach us to do the mitzvahs before we know what we're doing. Okay, what's the mitzvah of charity? What's the meditation in giving charity? What do you think? What is the meditation? What is the meditative agenda in giving charity? No? Anyone on the indoors? It's very quiet all of a sudden. How about on my online people?
Okay, what's the question one more time?
What is the meditation? What is the meditative intent in giving charity?
In giving charity to, I don't know, help others, to spread God's will, because it's really not your money.
So what is the consciousness and the awareness that giving charity brings us to?
Awareness that we're all one, and basically you're supposed to help others.
Beautiful.
That's the awareness.
Okay. So giving charity helps us to develop a more merciful and kind attitude.
I think you enjoy giving it.
Oh, and if you enjoy it, it's even better. But you know what? I heard something beautiful. I'll tell you a story. This is the paradox of Jewish charity. Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber, the fifth Rebbe of Lubavitch, he grew up, his father was a Rebbe also. And he and his brother, he had a brother of Zalman Aaron. Zalman Aaron was his brother. And Zalman Aaron was older, Shalom Ber was younger. So they grew up in the house of a Rebbe, and all day long, what do they hear? A Rebbe, a Chassid, a spiritual teacher, and a student. So what do these kids play when they play? So they decided to play Rebbe and Chassid. Reb Zalman Aaron is the older one, so he's going to be the Rebbe, and Shalom Ber, who later himself grew up to be the Rebbe, was going to be the Chassid. So Reb Zalman Aaron sits down in the chair, and Shalom Ber comes in, and he writes a note, as you do when you go to the Rebbe. Please arouse divine mercy for my soul, from the source of mercy for me, Shalom Dov Ber ben Shmuel, he gave his mother's name. And he says, I'm asking a tikkun, I'm asking for rectification for my soul, because I did a sin. What did I do? I ate I ate the sesame seeds, sunflower seeds on Shabbos. And I learned that while some halachic authorities permit it, in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law written by his great grandfather, the Baal HaTanya, I read that he says that you shouldn't eat those kinds of nuts on Shabbos, those kinds of seeds on Shabbos, because they're borer.
Why? Because you have to break them?
Because of the muktzah, because the muktzah of the shells, and because the muktzah of the shells, because you end up handling muktzah. So Reb Zalman Aaron told him, I'll give you a tikkun, I'll give you a practice which will bring healing to your soul. You should, from now on, you should pray only looking inside the siddur. Shouldn't pray by heart anymore. Reb Shalom Ber says, you're a fake Rebbe. So what are you talking about? What did I do wrong? A real Rebbe gives a krechts before he answers. He would give a deep sigh before he gave you the healing practice. So this is the paradox of Jewish charity. That it's healing the world, but it should hurt us a little bit. We should do it with joy, but we should also do it with a little bit of pain. Text 9. The root of the mitzvah to lend to the poor. Here he's not even talking about giving tzedakah. To lend money to the poor, which is in a way, it's the highest kind of tzedakah, because you allow the poor person to retain dignity. Right? Is that God desired that his creatures become accustomed and train themselves in the characteristics of kindness and mercy. For these are praiseworthy characteristics. Through training their bodies to act according to positive behaviors, they will be worthy of receiving goodness. For as we have explained, goodness and blessing fall exclusively on the good. That is, when we are goodly oriented, we are more open to the goodness of the universe. For were it,
Should you be a little bit more specific when you say goodness of the universe?
I'll soon, hopefully, I'll try.
Maybe another course?
If it were not for this benefit, God could provide the poor with their needs without us. Right? Think about it for a minute. If every animal has what he needs, why is it that the human animals don't have what they need? I was joking around with the word human animal again.
I've not heard that.
If every animal has what they need, you ever saw a poor pigeon? No such thing as a poor pigeon. They have everything they need. You ever saw a poor squirrel?
Never.
Never. They have everything they need. God gave, God opens his hand and generously provides for every living thing with his goodwill. So why is it that there are poor people? If not for this benefit, God could provide for the poor provide the poor with their needs without us. Rather, out of sheer kindness, the blessed God made us his messengers so that we can become meritorious through this process. God could have designed a world where everyone had what they need. There wouldn't be a need for charity. But God, the opportunity, the meditative opportunity made available through the mitzvah of tzedakah is that we can become compassionate, that we can become giving and loving, which is something that is something that emerges from this imbalance of haves and have-nots. So through the act of giving tzedakah, we inculcate in ourselves and ingrain in ourselves this trait of compassion and kindness. And as Irina said also, on deeper than just compassion and kindness, we also demonstrate the interconnectedness of the universe, how all of us are one. That transfer of goods from one person to another demonstrates the interdependence, the independence and interdependence on each other. In a sense, I'll just talk about that interdependence for a moment. We are dependent on those who are dependent on us for our ability to generate compassion. If not for the needy people, I would be a stingy and cold person. But because I encounter people who are needy, that has given me the gift, the most important gift of all. The gift that the needy person gives me is much greater than the gift I give them. I give them a few dollars, and in turn, I get a softened heart. Which one would you rather have? Which one is deeper? Which one is more important? Well, so,
People need to be needed.
yeah, people need to be needed, right? So, and that's what Yosef was talking about before, how good it feels, right? To be needed. But let's go deeper than that also and just talk about the way that it changes me for the good, right? Okay, next. So this is a practice. So the meditative practice, by the way, of tzedakah, this is something that the Rebbe encouraged on an ongoing basis. You know, the Rebbe used to give out dollars, right? What he was doing was encouraging people to give small amounts of tzedakah in addition to their philanthropy. see tzedakah as a meditative practice. Every day, start out your day by putting some money aside for tzedakah, by putting a coin or a dollar in the pushka, in a tzedakah, in a box designated for charity. And in this way, you every day have this repeating, this consistent recurring practice of training yourself, training ourselves to be kind and compassionate. Text 11. Shabbos. What's the meditation in keeping Shabbos? Everybody needs a break once in a while, right?
Rabbi, before you continue,
Yes, yes. Sir.
I would like to add it to what I said. It's not only you enjoy. Let's say you go to a restaurant, you pay for $50 steak and wine and all this. You enjoy it for the next 2 hours. But if you take your $50, you give it to 20 people, you're going to enjoy it at least a week. And that keeps you happy for a whole week. Not like you eat a steak and glass of wine and you go home and sleep.
Yeah. And we know what the steak and wine turn into in the end. And we know what the tzedakah turns into in the end.
That's what I just said.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
Beautiful, beautiful. Let's talk about Shabbos for a moment. The Shabbos, we think that we're resting, but actually the observances of Shabbos are a meditation meant to train us to think a certain way. The root of this commandment is to abstain from work on Shabbos, or not only from work, but from skilled creative activities, transformative behaviors, like making light, like making words, right? This is not just work. This is constructive and creative, intentional, skilled activities. The root of this commandment to abstain from work on Shabbos is that we should free ourselves from our occupations to honor the day of Shabbos, thereby instilling within ourselves the belief in God's creation of the universe. For this belief is the cord to which every foundation of religion is attached. The observance of Shabbos reminds us, by abstaining from transforming our environment, which is the things that we don't do on Shabbos, are things that transform our environment, we connect to the world that is. We connect to the world that is what it is. And that trains us to embrace the creator of the universe. We turn away from our intentional creative work in the world, and we turn to admire, to appreciate the created world which we receive from the creator. Understand what I'm saying? We spend so much time acting on our environment, modifying our environment. And here's it, which is very important. We do that 6 out of 7 days. That's the meaning. That's very, very meaningful stuff. Now we take a time to pull back and to look at the environment which we were provided. And that draws our attention to the source of the universe, to the creator of the universe. It reminds us that while we modify the environment, we didn't create the environment. And this is the most foundational awareness in all of our spiritual work, recognizing that we were provided an environment and that it has its own source. Or in traditional Jewish terms, that God created the universe. We put on tefillin during the weekdays. What is the meditation of putting on tefillin? We put tefillin on our arm and on our head. These are the arm next to the heart, and on top of the head, over our prefrontal cortex, which is to direct our attention to the higher faculties of the human being and to associate them with our teachings of meaning, which are encased in the tefillin. Text 12, among the commandments from God that are for the sake of molding thoughts in order to serve him in purity is the commandment of tefillin. Tefillin are to be placed on the body in locations corresponding to the brain and the heart, the seats of intellect and perception. And laying tefillin and contemplating their purpose leads to dedicating all thoughts to the good and leads to constantly remembering to be careful to calibrate our deeds in righteousness and justice. Another one is the mezuzah, right? We have the mezuzah in all of our doors. And the Rambam, Maimonides, says we should be careful to, we think of the symbol, we think of the mezuzah as a symbol of a Jewish home, or for the purpose of divine protection. Rambam says, Maimonides says that the mitzvah is a meditation, is a meditative practice. By putting the mezuzah on our door and acknowledging it, acknowledging the mezuzah when we enter and leave our house or even a room, through observing this precept, whenever we enter or leave our homes, we encounter the symbol of God's unity and recall our love for him. This activity shakes us awake from our spiritual slumber, our obsession with material vanities, so that we recognize that nothing we gain lasts forever except knowledge of the creator of the universe. This will spur us to regain proper mindful awareness and make upright decisions. So when we pass the mezuzah and we acknowledge its presence, we are redirecting our attention to the source of the world, to the Shema, the meaning of the words in the mezuzah, the Shema, the oneness of the universe. So, so that's what I want to leave us with. We didn't do a meditation today because today's meditation is about the power of action and the intent, the impact that action can have on our mind. And actually, it's the most powerful meditation of all because it's the most real. It has concrete impact. The actions of mitzvahs are meditations, as we said before, that speak to us in our own language and that have a measurable change in the world around us. And so, you know, what we really want to think about, especially as meditators, as spiritual seekers, is that we one way that we can invite ourselves to a higher awareness than the one we're able to understand on our own is to do actions. And those actions will pull us to the next level. We also have the daily routine of prayer that we have here in the end of the page. What is it? Page 200, I think. Page 199, 200. Okay. The daily prayers, the morning, afternoon, and evening. Right? We talked about those a little bit. Okay. So what do we talk about over this course, over today's class? Action is the main thing, and at the same time, mitzvahs are meditations. Mitzvahs facilitate a connection between the human, the mortal, and the infinity of God, and invite us into a relationship with him. The intent with which we do the mitzvah brings meaning to the mitzvah. And the mitzvah, in turn, has an impact on us. Our intent impacts the meaning of the mitzvah, and the act of the mitzvah transforms the way we think. And every mitzvah has a meditative function that shapes our moral and spiritual perspectives and develops positive attitudes. So, what did we talk about throughout this course? Let's just kind of, in the 2 minutes overtime, let's take a minute just to think about the things that we talked about. We started out by talking about how meditation is a Jewish practice. And then we talked about the idea that the soul has an innate spiritual sense and how we can harness it through meditation to find a spiritual depth to reality and find deep meaning in every experience that happens to us. We talked about the divine providence, the accidents that are really divinely ordained, and how we can direct our attention to the presence of God in all of our experiences. We talked about how that awareness of the closeness with the divine, being in the presence of God always, and recognizing that there is intention to the universe and direction to the universe, can bring us to more joy, resilience, and purpose. We talked about time and how creation is constantly being renewed, and how that can help us to be present in each moment and recognize that each moment is an infinite divine creation. We talked about the proper mindset and intention that we can have while doing human simple behaviors like working, eating, and sleeping. We talked about the meditation in work, the meditation in eating, and the meditation in sleeping, and how those can be transformed from human acts to sacred and mind-blowing, divinely connecting acts. And finally, we talked about the power of action meditations. So my hope and prayer is that we would, by changing our mind, changing the way we think, we would, each one of us on our own and all together, have an impact, have real impact in our own lives, and have real impact on the world around us, and ultimately bring the world, the whole universe, to know itself for what it truly is. The whole world, that it should know itself for what it truly is. And when the whole world will know itself for what it truly is, when we'll all be in coherence with divine reality, that would be a world of peace. That would be a world of spiritual peace and of wellness. And that's what we call Mashiach. That's what we call the Messianic age. Being, how does the prophet say? Nigla, the glory of God will be revealed, and all flesh will see that the mouth of God has spoken. What does it mean that the mouth of God has spoken? God spoke, and the world was, right? Like we learned last night. The utterances of creation, right? So hopefully we, through our meditative practice, we would be able to perceive, all of us and the whole world would perceive, that this is not just a world, but this is all an expression of divine reality.